This is a crisis that goes deep into New York State. New York happens to be a sanctuary state, which is why we are the epicenter of this chaos. The reality is we do not have the ability in these poor rural communities, these poor rural counties, to support folks who are not allowed to work, who we have no ability to check their backgrounds. This was, I think, a defensive move and an appropriate one on the part of many counties. Then you had Erie County. They welcomed these busloads of migrants from New York City, and that quickly devolved into chaos. We had assaults, rapes, and so forth. This is the result. I mean, typically these folks were not emboldened to be violent. All these demands that are, quite frankly, being fueled by these NGOs and these far-left activists who are telling these folks that they have a right, because of the sanctuary policy, because of the right to shelter in New York City, they have a right to these things. And that's why you're seeing this, kind of bold, brazen criminality and everything else that goes along with this out-of-control migrant crisis, which is self-created by these policies.
Welcome to New York Insider. I'm Liam O'Neill, and I am seated today here in New York's capital, here in Albany. And the guest I have is Senator George Borrello, who is not here with me, but is joining us via video conference. Senator, thanks so much for being on New York Insider.
It's my pleasure to be on with you. Thank you.
Senator, your district is south of Buffalo. I don't think there's any big city in your district. It's very rural. Can you describe your constituency?
Yes, I represent 5 counties in western New York. They are very rural counties. Chautauqua County, where I live, which is just south of Erie County, where Buffalo is, and we have a huge lakefront community on Lake Erie. It's a lot of farms. We have in the northern end of the county, we have a lot of grape farms, and in the rest of the county, we have dairy farms, vegetable farms. In fact, agriculture is the number one industry in the 57th Senate District. So we are very different from urban areas like Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and certainly very, very different from New York City.
Yeah, no kidding. As my viewers will certainly know, this is a very new show. This is our first season, and you are our first rural guest. New York is partly what makes New York so great is the diversity, the beautiful geography that we have, and from New York City all the way up northwest to your end of things, we have everything in between. So it's great to have someone representing that constituency here on the show. Are you a farmer yourself? Do you have a farming background?
Actually, both of my grandfathers were farmers. My grandfather, my mother's father, had over 40 acres of grapes, as well as fruit trees and animals. My father's father was a smaller grape farmer, but also a plumber. So we are definitely, hands-on family that I come from. My path is a little different, but I am a small business owner. My wife and I are in the restaurant business, and we own some restaurants in our area in Chautauqua County along the Lake Erie shoreline in a little resort community called Sunset Bay. So,
nice.
One of the few small business owners in the New York State Legislature, and but it's something that's very important to me because I understand the impact of New York's taxes and overregulation and everything else that has been so harmful, particularly to small businesses in New York State.
Yeah, right before we started recording here, you're a Republican, but you were telling me that your family is kind of all over the political map. Is that right?
Yes. Both of my father and my stepmother are Democrats. My father, my grandfather, lifelong Democrats. Interestingly enough, my stepmother is the chairman of the Democratic Party for the town that I live in. So very much a diverse group in my family. But again, they are the working class Democrats that I think were many years ago, that was the party of the working class. But in my opinion, that's no longer the case. That is, it has been commandeered by the far left, particularly here in New York State.
So, Senator, we have asked you to come on to New York Insider to talk about Laken's Law. You are a co-sponsor of that piece of legislation. Tell us a little bit about the history and where it is right now in the process.
Well, Laken's Law, prior to the tragic death of Laken Riley, was a bill that we'd introduced back in, I believe, January, at the beginning of session. And it is essentially saying that all law enforcement agencies are required to cooperate with federal immigration authorities when they encounter a non-citizen. So that goes directly counter to New York State and New York City's sanctuary policy. And what's tragic is that there is no question in my mind that Laken Riley would be alive today if Jose Ibarra, who was arrested in New York for endangering the welfare of a child, had been turned over to federal immigration authorities. In fact, my understanding is the ICE did want to hang on to him, and because of New York's sanctuary policies and our lax bail laws, the catch and release criminal justice system that we now have in New York, he was released. He, of course, fled to Georgia and tragically kidnapped Laken Riley. Once that happened, we then changed the law, the name of the law, to in her memory, to Laken's Law. So that's the history behind it. I mean, some might think, well, this is something we did after it occurred, but no. This is something that we introduced here in Albany long before the tragedy of Laken Riley's death, and had it been adopted, she would likely be alive today.
So, Senator, could you tell me, please, what is the likelihood of this legislation passing? It's been on the table since January, but maybe it's got some new legs?
Well, first and foremost, I think the people of New York need to understand that this is a common sense proposal. In fact, just going back a few years, you would say this would, we can't even believe that we would even need this law. But we do here in New York State because of the sanctuary policies of what is one-party rule here in New York. So while this proposal is, I would say, unlikely of getting legs under the current makeup of New York State government, it's really incumbent upon the people of New York to recognize the fact that New York State has become a far more dangerous place with one-party rule here in New York State, and that change is needed. I would hope that some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would look at this as something that overwhelmingly New Yorkers would support. In fact, a recent poll said 82% consider the migrant crisis a serious problem for New York State. So that means literally every political stripe thinks that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. So the first role of government is to protect its citizens. And New York State has failed miserably on many fronts when it comes to protecting the basic safety of New Yorkers. And this particular case has now become deadly. This is not the only situation where someone has lost their life as a result of lax criminal justice laws, and in this case, because of sanctuary policies. So New Yorkers need to stand up and say enough is enough. And if they speak loudly enough, my Democrat colleagues will be forced to listen.
So you're hopeful that this common sense legislation could pass?
Yes, I think at the end of the day, this should not be a political statement. This is about public safety. It is about ensuring that those folks, particularly that are not here, that are non-citizens of New York State, that in most cases are here illegally, that they are held accountable for their actions. And that is certainly a message that needs to be sent, because right now we are seeing a massive influx of people to New York State from all over the world. Once you go beyond the southern border, the border states, the so-called migrant crisis is almost exclusively in sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. And New York happens to be a sanctuary state, and New York City a sanctuary city, which is why we are the epicenter of this chaos. And by not holding those folks accountable with something as common sense as, if you break the law, if you commit a crime here in New York, turned over to federal authorities. By saying we're not going to do that here, it is emboldening and fueling this crisis.
Yeah, so clearly you are addressing the criminality aspect of sanctuary state policy, but there's much more than that that comes about because of the illegal migrant crisis. And frankly, I asked you about your constituency. You're very rural. You're, 300 miles from New York City, 400 miles
Yes.
from New York City. When we think about the illegal immigrants, we're thinking about the camps at Roosevelt Hotel in Manhattan and other places in the 5 boroughs. We think about it as a New York City problem. Is it a problem for your constituents?
Well, I think it's an issue that's touched every corner of this state. Obviously, when you look at New York City, a city of 8 million people, and the mayor of New York City declared this a crisis when they reached about 40,000 immigrants in New York City. So that's only 0.5% of the population of one of the wealthiest cities in the world with so many resources. You translate that into small communities I represent. I mean, the largest city in my district is about 23,000 people. Then that means just a handful can create the same type of strain on resources and crisis that we're seeing in New York City, and it has. We have migrants in cities like Jamestown, which is a small city of 23,000 people, and it has strained the resources of our charitable organizations. With just a handful of people, a few dozen people, and no doubt about it that this is being exported from New York City with the corrupt deal that was made with this company DocGo, which was a no-bid contract to a company that essentially was, for lack of a better term, smuggling people upstate, putting them in hotels, hiding the realities from local law enforcement and from media. So this is a crisis that goes deep into New York State, and New York City is looking to do more of that. And we have now sent an additional, in this budget, $2.4 billion with a B to New York City, on top of the $1.9 billion last year to New York City to address this. And what are they using those state taxpayer dollars for? To export the pain throughout this state that they're experiencing largely. They continue to do things that fuel this mass influx of people. And they're now giving prepaid debit cards, rechargeable debit cards, with completely unrestricted cash on those debit cards for these migrants to use. You can't tell me that word isn't spreading, and more and more are going to come to New York State to take advantage of that. It's I was told recently that when you look at what the mayor's estimate of what it costs, I believe it's just under $400 per day per migrant. That works out to be about $26 million a day. That's an outrageous amount of money. When you look at our New York State Veteran Services, that's like $12 million annually that's budgeted for that. So by lunchtime, we've spent more in New York City on people that have come to the state illegally than we spend on veteran services for a year. It's just absolutely unconscionable.
For a year. When you put it that way, those are some pretty stark numbers. I want to go back to the budget momentarily, but first, can you back up? You said something, I'm not familiar with this, and I'm not sure if my viewers are either. DocGo, a company that was, go back to that story about how they're shipping migrants up to your rural community?
So there was a company called DocGo. They were hired by New York City. This is a company who was supposed to essentially address the needs of these migrants in New York City. But what they ended up doing was putting them on buses, negotiating deals with property owners, hotel owners in various parts of the state, Rockland County, Erie County, and elsewhere, and then shipping them up there with security. And there are, images of media trying to get to some of these facilities, and they're being blocked by this DocGo security team from being able to, film what was going on there. Now, this is taxpayer dollars paying for this, and they are, essentially trying to block anyone from recognizing what's actually going on there. And on top of it, this was my understanding, I think it was a couple $100 million contract with DotGo. I mean, it was a huge amount of money, and it was given out without a bid. It was a no bid contract because of a declared state of emergency for this migrant crisis. Which I don't know how you declare a state of emergency for something that is self-created. That we have a welcome mat out with our sanctuary policies.
Not even at the federal level you're talking about. It's created in-house here in the state and in the city.
That's correct. So you invite people to come to New York State, and then you declare a state of emergency because they show up. That doesn't make any sense to me.
There were lawsuits filed about a year ago between both the city had lawsuits against counties, and counties were going against the city for some of these migrants being shipped out from the city into the outlying communities. Is this part of the .go fiasco?
Yes. I mean, first and foremost, counties like I believe every county that I represent, and the county I live in, Chautauqua County, our county executive issued a state of emergency also saying we do not have the resources to accept these people here. And that's the truth. The reality is we do not have the ability in these poor rural communities, these poor rural counties, to support folks who are not allowed to work, who we have no ability to check their backgrounds, who need, obviously food, shelter, clothing, medical attention. And so this was I think, a defensive move and an appropriate one on the part of many counties. Then you had Erie County, which is, where Buffalo is, and they scoffed at, I shouldn't say their leadership scoffed at the idea of the surrounding counties declaring an emergency. And they welcomed these busloads of migrants from New York City, and that quickly devolved into chaos. We had assaults, rapes, and so forth that occurred, not long after these buses arrived in Erie County. And you have to look at that situation and say, there's a reason why you call them undocumented, because we don't know what these backgrounds are. And we are certainly hearing stories of countries like Venezuela that are emptying their prisons and sending them across the southern border, the open border of the Biden administration to the United States. This is the result. I mean, we have had people coming to the United States, illegally for a long time. But typically these folks were, not emboldened to be violent. They were not certainly emboldened to ask for, I won't live in a shelter. I want to be in a hotel room. I need to have my culturally sensitive foods. All these demands that are, quite frankly, being fueled by these NGOs and these far left activists who are telling these folks that they have a right, because of the sanctuary policy, because of the right to shelter in New York City, they have a right to these things. And that's why you're seeing this, kind of bold, brazen criminality and everything else that goes along with this out-of-control migrant crisis, which is self-created by these policies.
So, Senator, I want to shift gears just a little bit. You mentioned momentarily ago that a lot of your constituents are relatively poor. I mean, certainly poorer than the wealth that you see in New York City and, around the city. The budget just passed last week. It was about 3 weeks overdue, $237 billion. Some of that, you said, 2.4, I think, is due to the migrant crisis. This is what I want to say. This is what I want to ask you. New York State, as you are aware, in the last several years, 4, 5, 6 years, has lost hundreds of thousands of people because of the onerous taxation, because of the loss of jobs. Is there anything in this budget that was recently passed that is going to turn that trend around?
I would say fundamentally no. The bad far outweighs the good in this budget. And look, the Democrats know that this is a problem for them. That pandering to the most radical elements of their party is going to potentially damage them in this upcoming election. This is an election year, so they try to nibble around the edges with this pathetic retail theft. For example, retail theft consequences, which isn't going to do anything. They'll nibble around the edges in order to try to save themselves politically, but they will never take a bite out of crime because they are unwilling to do what it needs to be done, which is to hold violent people accountable for their actions. I'll give you another clear example. They heralded this idea of creating new grand larceny grand larceny laws. A new criminal law, and essentially it's a cumulative amount of stolen goods that you're in possession of. Well, none of these grand larcenies, until you get to grand larceny in the first degree, is bail eligible. But in order to be accused of grand larceny in the first degree, you have to be in possession of more than $1 million of stolen goods. Now think about that. That's like a tractor trailer load of Louis Vuitton bags before you can be held on bail. So it's a pathetic attempt to make themselves look like they're doing something about crime. Retail theft is a huge problem. Violence in these shoplifting situations is a huge problem. And certainly you have story after story of these migrants who are stealing and then turning around and selling things. Like you can walk through the streets of the 5 boroughs and you'll see migrants with bottles of liquor that were stolen and other basic goods that you find at a grocery store or a pharmacy that they're selling on the street because they were stolen. So it's a major problem. People in New York City are starting to recognize the fact that their elected officials are unwilling to protect them, and the response in this budget was pathetic and nothing but smoke and mirrors to make it look like they're trying to do something about this.
Apart from the criminality, the rising crime, the budget that was recently passed is another increase. I think the budget has increased about 30 or 40% over 5 or 6 years. That's got to be hurting the constituents that you represent. When are things going to turn around in New York to make it more affordable for people?
Well, if spending large amounts of money was going to make New York safer and more affordable, then we should be, because New York State's budget is one of the largest in the nation. It is larger than the combined budgets of Texas and Florida, which combined have about double the population of New York State. So this whole idea of spending more money and to make New York State better and safer is just not playing out. Republicans lost the majority in the New York State Senate 5 years ago, and in 5 years the budget has gone up about 40% in 5 years, and continues to go up. This this budget again was another $8 billion more than last year's budget. So spending money is not making New York State better, safer. It's not keeping people from fleeing the state. So the argument there is just not holding up. But you asked how it's going to change. It's going to change when the people of New York State get fed up and start realizing that having one party ruling everything has been an unmitigated disaster, and that we need to restore balance in our state government. And that certainly starts with having the Republicans back in the majority in the New York State Senate. It's really the only way to really counter the fact that some of these most egregious radical ideas that were only ideas back when there was a balanced government in New York are now reality. And we're seeing that reality play out, and how dangerous, how expensive, and quite frankly, how unlivable New York has become. I mean, most New Yorkers believe, and this is a recent poll, I believe by Siena, Vast majority of New Yorkers believe that the quality of life is declining here. Even people in New York City, it was a significant amount. I believe it was 39% of people in New York City say that within the next 5 years they're going to leave. So this is a crisis. Wow. And despite how my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to dress it up, it's having a tremendous impact, and we're going to see more of it. So New Yorkers need to stand up, speak out, and quite frankly, vote out the people that are not working in their best interests.
Well, Senator, that's not a bright note to end on, but it's a loud and clear one. I want to thank you for being a guest here on New York Insider. We hope to see you again.
Thank you.